HR issues can kill you. One complaint against your company can turn your world upside down. And you spend way too much time dealing with HR when you should be spending your time on making a profit. You should talk to Bambi. With Bambi, get access to your own dedicated US-based HR manager starting at just $99 per month. They get to know you and your business while providing HR expertise and the personal touch you need and want. They're available by phone, email, and real-time chat, so onboarding and terminations run smoothly. Team members reach peak performance, and your business stays compliant with changing HR regulations. And with Bambi's HR Autopilot, you'll automate important HR practices like setting policies, training, and feedback. HR managers can easily cost $80,000 a year, but Bambi starts at $99 per month. Schedule your free conversation today to see how much Bambi can take off your plate. Go to Bambi.com right now and type in Accelerate under podcast when you sign up. It'll really help the show. Spelled BAM, BEE.com. Bambi.com. Type in Accelerate.
¿Por qué esta Coca-Cola de McDonald's sabe tan bien? ¿Será la máquina? ¿Será el popote o el hielo? O quizás soy yo.
No sé, Diego, pero vámonos, ¿no? El ¿por qué esto sabe tan bien deal? Un refresco de cualquier tamaño por $1, solo en el $1, $2, $3 menu de McDonald's. Precios y participación pueden variar, no se puede combinar con cualquier otra oferta o combo mío. Coca-Cola es una marca registrada de The Coca-Cola Company.
Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth with your host, Diane Helbig. Diane is a leading small business development and leadership coach, author, and speaker who is passionate about sharing valuable ideas, tips, and techniques with business professionals worldwide. Diane brings you the world's experts and gurus in all things business. Whether it's sales, structure, social media, planning, or plateauing, guests bring their expertise and energy to each episode. When growing your business is your focus, Accelerate Your Business Growth is the show to listen to. Got a topic or guest suggestion? Let Diane know. The goal is to make sure you have the information you need to move your business forward. Thanks for joining us. Settle in and enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. We are thrilled to be sponsored by Audible.com, and they have been gracious enough to provide a free trial for our listeners. You can go to audibletrial.com/businessgrowth, sign up for that free trial, and explore on your own, not just the audiobooks, but check out all the other content as well. Over the years, the Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast has been recognized as a great resource for business and entrepreneurs. We enjoy inclusion on lists of the best podcasts to listen to in a variety of categories. And that is because of the guests. These are folks who have expertise in particular areas of business, and they join me for a conversation where they share that expertise with all of you. Today is no different. My guest today is Sejal Thakkar. Dubbing herself Chief Civility Officer, Sejal is not your average employment law attorney. Her more than 15 years of experience advising clients, human resources personnel, and legal counsel regarding sound, standard employment practices uncovered a need and a personal passion for bringing more proactive, relevant, and impactful workplace training programs to her clients and their teams. Thanks so much for joining me today, Sejal.
Oh, thank you, Diane. It's my pleasure. And I really, as I mentioned before, I appreciate this opportunity to share my insights and perspectives with you and everyone listening.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. This topic of civility is so current. Good or bad. But I want to start with, when I was reading your bio, and it says that you have dubbed yourself the Chief Civility Officer. Why do you call yourself that?
It's so as you mentioned, I'm an employment law attorney, and I basically, since I was from 2003 till about 8 years ago, I was a defense attorney. I was actually in court litigating cases, representing supervisors and managers in cases that primarily dealt with sexual harassment and discrimination. And so in that role, I saw all kinds of incivility happening in the workplace, and when I say incivility, I'm talking about a whole range of behaviors, anything from somebody being rude or insensitive all the way up to your harassment, discrimination cases. And so when I started my business 3 years ago, I really wanted to work with organizations on a proactive basis because obviously, once the lawsuit is filed, it's too late to really help with creating a culture where this sort of incivility doesn't happen. And so my goal right now, and the reason why I started my company was to work with companies to help them create cultures of what I call civility.
Got it. Boy, that makes so much sense. Okay. So talk to me about why it is that disability has increased so much.
Just if we just look at Diane, the last year by itself, it has just gotten worse. And let me just focus on that because I think a lot of times when leaders or HR are looking at their culture, they forget to take into account where we are today. A lot of times policies are drafted a couple years ago and they haven't been reviewed. So I think, for people that are listening to this, you want to make sure that you review your training, your policies, and make sure that you have accountability that's going to deal with incivility in your organization that we are seeing today. So just in the last year, we obviously with the global pandemic, that created so many challenges for employers. And, when you're dealing with COVID and who gets to take time off, who's an essential worker. And there was so much information that was going around that was inaccurate. We saw increase in racism and bias against Asian, Chinese individuals. And so that started off by creating incivility and, increasing incivility in the workplace, just a global pandemic dealing with all those issues. And then we saw such a huge shift to remote work. We've never seen such a dynamic shift before. So now you've got all these employees working from home. They're not face to face. They're communicating through email, through Slack, through Zoom. We're doing virtual conferences. And so we saw an increase in incivility because of that. I think that culture kind of took a back seat, whereas, I think a lot of times companies started thinking, well, if we're not face to face, how can there be any harassment or how can there be discrimination? And it can still happen even if you're behind a screen. And so we saw cyberbullying, for example, lots of cyberbullying happening, lots of microaggressions. So incivility increased because of the remote working piece. And then obviously the civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, that increased racism and bias in ways that it just brought everything to the surface. So we saw a lot of incivility because of that. And then some of the things that I've seen lately are, I'm getting a lot of, not a lot, but I've had a few calls with HR on they're starting to see incivility in the workplace because of, employees are staying in the workplace longer. So now you've got all these different generations working together. And so there's issues and incivility because of, ineffective communication or just personality differences and so forth. So lots of different issues have come up in this last year. And so organizations, they're dealing with a lot. I have to really, give a shout out to HR and leaders for really trying to navigate through all of the challenges we've dealt with in the last year or so.
Yeah, no kidding. It is almost constant. It's like you're afraid to open your eyes in the morning because you don't know what the next thing is that's going to be happening, right? That's going to confront you.
Yeah, Exactly. And it's scary too, because, the laws are changing all the time. I mean, I made a decision at the beginning of COVID because it was going to be, you know, the laws were going to change so often that it could become a full-time job for me to just kind of keep up with just the laws regarding COVID and how to deal with those issues. And so I kind of stayed away from it. I mean, I've sort of kept up to date on it, but not to the level where I can provide any sort of subject matter expertise on it because it was just so much. And so even for small businesses, you had to either retain legal counsel or have somebody in HR that was really staying on top of those laws just to make sure you're following all of the different requirements.
Exactly. Right. Right. Okay. So, what can companies do to mitigate that incivility? And especially in a remote, because I thought it was really interesting when you said, you know, business leaders wouldn't necessarily think that there could be issues when people aren't in the same space, but there are. They're just maybe slightly different. So what can a company do to?
Yeah. So, when you look at organizations at a whole, right, you want to have a comprehensive plan. So obviously you want to make sure training, and making sure the training is effective is one big component of that plan. But also your policies have to be updated and reviewed to make sure they're current. So when talking about the piece
Mm,
you just mentioned about the online harassment or cyberbullying, a lot of these policies were drafted before. And really, I mean, I've reviewed several policies just in the past few months where it doesn't really go into harassment or discrimination happening on technology as much as it needs to, right? So
yeah.
having clear policies that are relevant and up to date is very important. And then I think, again, when there are issues, and so going back to remote working, if somebody observes the harassment happening remotely, how do they report it? And so again, you have to make sure that you have a really robust complaint process that allows people to make these complaints or report these concerns in multiple ways, right? So you have to review that to make sure, are there processes in place for people to actually raise these issues if these issues are occurring, whether they're happening in person or not. And then when a concern is made, the organization obviously needs to look into that and be timely and prompt and make sure they handle these complaints in the proper way in order to not just mitigate legal liability, but also to make sure that they're getting involved so that they can address these situations as they're happening. And then you want to make sure that if policies were violated, and then they're taking proper action. So are there appropriate remedies to continue to maintain that culture of civility? So you have to look at a lot of different components. And then here's the piece that I think gets lost sometimes, is that, it's not a one-time thing. It's a constant, it's a continuous activity. So you need to then go back and make sure that is there accountability? Are there new complaints? And not just resolving the complaint that has come up, but then going back and taking a look at that situation to see, are there systemic issues that we need to deal with? Are there bigger issues than just this one complaint? So you have to look at how do you manage that, all of these different risks. So it is a lot that you have to look at. And then when you throw in things like what we saw last week with technology, where, I had clients that were saying, we can't have anybody work from home for a single day. And now you've had to have everybody working from home. They weren't ready for that. So
Yeah.
that's another piece that you want to make sure that you are looking at as far as maintaining civility in the workplace. So speaking of cyberbullying, I mean, I'm glad that we're kind of talking about this because I think that lots of companies haven't really taken a look at their policies. I don't think they properly trained their middle managers on what to do if these kinds of situations are arising, right? And especially when it's turning into cyberbullying, and cyberbullying can take place in a lot of different formats. So the times have really changed. And then we're seeing a lot of talking on this because of the civil rights movement, I think that, if you were sort of thinking diversity and inclusion were sort of a nice to have, or, oh, we'll get around to it, it's just not going to work. You really have to make diversity and inclusion, have a robust plan around it and make it a priority along with civility. So one of the things, Diane, I say is, have your core values, and obviously diversity should be a core value, inclusion should be a core value. And I talk about how civility should be a separate core value. I think they're all different, and they all need to have comprehensive plans behind each one of them to drive these changes.
Boy, you're not kidding. Because it's so interesting for me. It's the kind of thing, it's insidious, right? Like if it's happening and the leadership doesn't know it's happening, and the leadership hasn't created systems for what to do, in the event that it happens, and then people don't bring it up, but they're still experiencing it. It's like, it reminds me of the old days of sexual harassment, when it was considered, just a thing and not really harassment,
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's so dangerous to the entire organization.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen, there was a report that came out, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And this really was sort of what motivated me to kind of go out on my own. But this was a report that EEOC came out with in 2016. They had put together a task force of managers, of attorneys, of leaders, all kinds of different subject matter experts. And then they published this report. It's over 100 pages long. And it really goes into, why hasn't our harassment complaints, or why hasn't the trainings that the companies are offering to their employees to stop harassment, why hasn't that worked? And it really, this task force looked at it, and they came out with some pretty key findings, and one of them, when I saw this, I was like, I knew it was a problem, but until I read it in the report, I didn't realize how big of a problem it was, that, the workplace harassment issue is getting worse, literally every year. It's not getting better. And so you think about how companies are spending thousands of dollars on their harassment, trainings.
Yeah.
Why isn't it working?
Yeah.
Right. And then the report really kind of goes through all of it. And that's one of the reasons why I really approach it from the civility angle, because they talk about that in that report, and they give you statistics. The data is right there.
So, okay, that's blowing my mind. So all these companies are spending all this money on training. The training's not working. Mm-hmm. And so you look at it and you say, okay, it's because there isn't an emphasis on people just being civil to one another. Is that it?
It's part of it. That's part of it.
Okay.
So part of it is, look, the biggest issue is, we know that there's harassment that's happening. The data supports that, right? And what the bigger issue is that we also know that 3 out of 4 people are not reporting the harassment that's happening in the workplace. Wow. Right? Because of all kinds of reasons. They're afraid of retaliation. They're afraid that they don't know what their rights are. They don't know if anybody will believe them. There's hundreds of reasons why people don't report. They're afraid that, the institution's going to betray them, et cetera. And so my issue is, you need to create a culture where there's psychological safety, so that people feel comfortable addressing incivility when it starts to happen, rather than wait for the lawsuit to come. Right. And so we need to create these cultures of civility. So when I talk about, again, as I said earlier, civility, I'm talking about a range of behaviors. Right. Yeah. And so the way that I look at it is that, typically when someone starts to harass somebody, so let's just say, sexual harassment, I'm just using that as an example. It could be, anything. But we typically in these cases, at least from my experience, and just the data supports this, is that you'll start seeing some rude or maybe some flirtatious comments, or something that starts off smaller. And then the person sees how much they can get away with, and then it continues until it ends up being something where the person complains, right? And now we have to make the decision, or do an investigation to determine whether harassment has happened or whether there was a violation of policy. So my approach is let's be proactive. So let's empower the employees to have conversations to say, because look, the person might have said something because maybe in their culture it was appropriate, but for this person it crossed the line. So we need to give people the skills and the tools and maybe even the scripts to say, how do you address this behavior when it starts to happen before that progression continues, so that we can just address it right away. So a lot of times as an attorney, one of the things I heard a lot is from people that were alleged to have engaged in harassing behavior. A lot of times what I heard was, I didn't know that. I wish I would have known that. Or that wasn't my intention. Or I was joking. Or I was, I heard all these excuses. So my thing is, let's get rid of that. Let's tell people to put each other on notice in a respectful, professional way, so that if it in fact was something that, let's say the person was joking, now they know. And then most people should stop at that point. If it continues, we have to deal with that issue because now the person knows and they're continuing. But most people, once they know about it, they're going to stop. Because, I think most people are well-intentioned, good people, and they just don't know. They think it's okay. And because when people are on the receiving side, we know that most people aren't saying anything or reporting it, that behavior just continues and continues until when I got into the picture, this behavior has become normal for that organization, right? It's gone on for so long and no one's done anything or said anything about it. And now it's become a part of the culture, which is now toxic. So let's address these issues earlier on. And so that's, I think, such a huge piece, right?
Yeah,
but
no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, it's so true. You're talking about this, and I keep thinking about how it grows and grows and grows. It's like a snowball. And so not only does it become the culture, but the person who was doing it then listen and says, well, why didn't somebody say something before? Like, I've been doing this. Now this is a problem?
Right.
It wasn't a problem before. So it's not really fair to anybody in the organization to not have a process or a system or focus, whatever, on being able to have respectful conversations around what's acceptable and what isn't. Wow.
Right. And that's what the EEOC said in that report, is that focus what a lot of employers were doing is they were just checking the box. Okay, so we have to do sexual harassment training once a year or once every 2 years, and that's all we're going to do. And that's not what was intended, right? That was to say, this is the minimum that you should do. You should do way more. But organizations weren't doing that. And so they talk about how, you need to expand the scope of your training to focus more on sort of a holistic approach to respectful workplaces, or, civility in the workplace. And also, one thing that a lot of employers weren't doing is focusing in on equipping employees with how to be bystanders and intervene, which is the biggest component, right? So we can't, we encourage people when they're, on the receiving end to do something about it, but really it's the bystanders who should be speaking up and doing something about it, because they're observing this behavior happening. And but people don't have the tools to do that. They don't know how to intervene properly. So that's another area that has to be given more attention by organization, is to empower employees to intervene in these situations, especially if you think about it. Just because of last year with the civil rights movement, we can't deny that this has brought up bias in so many different ways. And so if somebody has unconscious bias and it's showing up as microaggressions, people need to first understand what unconscious bias is, so that they can do the work individually on themselves to figure out what their own blind spots might be. It's normal. Everybody has unconscious bias, right? It's a normal processing of our brain, but they need to understand their own blind spots, because if they don't, it might be resulting in microaggressions towards their coworkers at work, which is going to, again, impact the civility in the organization. So people need to know what to do or how to recognize them and what to do when it happens, which, again, is not happening as much as it should.
So that feels like one of the things that needs to happen is that the leadership throughout the organization, not just at the top, but really, at the main level, really needs to learn how to engage in those conversations because they're uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right. And there's pushback and people tend to avoid what's uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
it feels like those people need to be equipped with how do you have these conversations in a way that is productive.
Absolutely. And Diane, I would even go further than that. I think every employee, every person in the organization needs to understand their own bias, their own, how it might result in microaggressions and what to do if they see somebody else. Leadership 100%, but so does everybody else, because every person through their daily actions, through the decisions they make, are going to impact the culture of the organization. So everybody needs to be involved.
Right.
And I think that's also one of the reasons why it hasn't worked, is it's become one of those things like, oh, it's an HR issue or it's a legal issue. No, it's everybody's issue because we all contribute to the culture when we're working at an organization.
Right.
At this time, I'd like to take a sponsor break. The Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast is happy to be sponsored by Audible.com. And I'm sure you know that Audible.com has thousands of audiobook titles to choose from, but you might not know about the other content. There's podcasts, Audible originals, guided meditations. My favorite thing is to be able to listen to different kinds of things all on the same platform. I think it's a time saver and it's like a productivity hack for me. I don't have to go jumping from one platform to another. So we're offering you a free trial. You can go to audibletrial.com/businessgrowth, sign up for that free trial, and then explore on your own. Check out the audiobooks, check out the other programs, see what really, resonates with you. Interested in getting some help with your sales strategy? Pick up a copy of Succeed Without Selling on Amazon or wherever books are sold.
So does that mean that everyone needs to go through the same trainings? Because it feels to me like first the people who are in leadership positions need to get some sort of training on, starting with their own biases, but how to make sure that the culture is a good one, not a bad one. But then I feel like I'm also hearing you say that everyone then needs to go through this other training that gets to their own, where they're able to really key in on who they are and how they show up. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that, again, you have to look at sort of the people in your organization to take a look at what is the culture that you have. And then you have to take a look at what are the issues that are happening. So we know that how does incivility, what is incivility in our organization? What are the things that are happening, right? So you have to customize a training plan, and it's not a one-time thing. It needs to be a comprehensive plan. But I think the components you definitely want to include in there are, you want to have a training on respectful workplaces or civility training, right? That has to be a huge component. And within that, you need to give people skills on how to communicate effectively, how to resolve conflict, how to speak up if you're a bystander, right? So there's certain topics you want to include as part of your respectful workplace or civility training piece. Then I think you also have to look at it from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. And within that sort of training plan, you want to make sure that you're addressing things like unconscious bias, microaggression, again, how to interrupt microaggressions. You might even need to go through deeper issues such as white supremacy, privilege, again, you're going to have to look and see what might be necessary at your organization, right?
Right.
And so there is no one, here's the, you have to look at it.
Mhm.
And then I think there has to be another component as well. So we've talked about civility, diversity and inclusion, but I also think that there should be some other training too on, some people call it soft skills, but I don't know. I think definitely, at least for leadership, there needs to be additional training on how to be a good leader, how to go
Mhm.
more, I think a lot of leaders are getting promoted up because they get the work done, not
Mhm.
necessarily because they need to lead. And, leadership at all levels of the organization needs to have additional training. So for example, in California, if you work for any of the public state agencies and you want to be and you get promoted or you want to be a supervisor, from the time you become a supervisor, this is law in California, it's in our government code. You have a certain amount of time, and then you have to go through 80 hours of mandated what they call basic supervisory training. And this covers a whole history, like a lot of different topics: how to do performance evaluation, how to motivate your employees, how to document properly, how to, what is the complaint process? What are the laws that you need to be aware of? And so supervisors should have robust training plans around all of these topics. And and now with technology, it doesn't all have to happen. I mean, the state is ridiculous. They do 40 hours in 1 week and 40 hours. That's all going to change. But when I was doing that training, it was literally 5 days, 8 hours a day.
Wow.
But now, with technology, you can make it available through a lot of different ways. But I think leadership is critical, obviously, to the culture of the organization, and they need more training. There's no question about
No question about it.
it. Yeah.
Wow. It's so amazing to me that even with all of the training that has been going on, it has not necessarily been effective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if you were, how do I want to ask this question? Um, if someone's listening and they own a small business and they've had to go virtual and they don't even know if there's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
um, what would you advise like their first step should be in any sort of process? Because I really liked what you said about it. Really, you have to find out what's going on in the organization. I think that's so true. That you want to address. You want to start with where you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
So, what would you say?
I would say first thing is you want to take a look at what your mission statement, what your core values are. It all starts there, right? I mean, it kills me when I go in to do a training for an organization and I'll ask one of the supervisors, can you tell me what your core values are? And they have no clue. Huge problem, right? So I think that's where you start. You have to know what your core values are. And so, like I said earlier, I'm out there advocating for civility to be a core value for all organizations. And so, like with any core value, you want to make sure there's commitment to those core values by leadership. If you don't have that commitment and buy-in, it's not going to work, right? There has to be a sincere and visible commitment by leadership for all the core values. And then what you want to do is you want to clearly define each of those core values, because people need to know what these core values are. So you want to communicate them, clearly define them, and then you want to communicate them to all employees, right? Not just the leadership, but everybody needs to understand within the organization exactly what they're being asked to do, what the core values are. Now, people need to also realize that some of those core values may not be core values for everybody, right? And so there needs to be at least some sort of evaluation about how to handle that situation, right? So if leaders don't agree with the core values, so you need to get to a shared core values by leadership that everybody agrees on, and then clearly communicate it to everybody. That's where you need to start. So then the other part of that you want to make sure is that you have to have, accountability is critical in these situations. So at all levels, not just the top senior level, not the C-suite, but just at all levels of the organization, you want to have accountability systems in place to make sure that everybody is acting in accordance to those core values, right? So if people follow the core values, or if their role is to sort of enforce, the core values, or ensure that harassment isn't happening, for example, then you want to make sure those individuals are rewarded for doing their job well. And if people don't do their job well or don't meet up with these accountability expectations, then they should be penalized and appropriate actions should be taken. And this applies to everybody, right? The accountability applies to everybody. And so that's where I would start. And policies obviously have to be looked at and reviewed. Right now is the really good time actually to review your employee handbook, because a ton of laws, at least in California, just went into effect in January. So it's a good time right now for all businesses to review their policies, and I would say their entire employee handbook, because you want to make sure, just so much happened last year, so much went into effect this year, that this is actually a perfect time to do that.
I think that is such a huge point. That because I remember when the internet became a thing, and all of a sudden it was, oh, we need to add a social media policy section, to our handbook, and that was a whole big thing, and who can do what and whatnot. And you're right. I mean, last year, so many things happened, not just on the behavioral side or the emotional side, but with the people working remotely, with the pandemic, who's essential, who's not. That, boy, I would say I agree. I think that's a huge thing that these business leaders need to be doing, is looking at their policies and procedures and making sure that they're accounting for the world we're living in now.
Yeah, exactly. And like, for example, just like one policy, social media, right? I mean, is your employee handbook, look at your social media policy. Is it going to suffice to where we are right now? Because we didn't, unless you had everybody already working from home, then you might have considered some of these issues. But if you had nobody working from home, I doubt your social media policies, if you even have one, is going to be adequate for what we need it to be right now. If you have
good point. Yeah. And you just don't think about these things, unfortunately. We really don't stop and think, oh, wait, something changed. So it is a matter of helicoptering up and taking a look, a different view of your business.
Right.
Wow. This is just crazy. I really appreciate this information. I think it is so timely and so critically important. And I really like this focus and emphasis on civility and culture, because I think it changes the way companies deal with it. I think it actually probably makes it easier. So thank you so much for shedding light on, not only what's going on, but what we need to do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important. And I think that this is the right time to really do the work proactively rather than wait, because, I think just from what I'm seeing, people's tolerance levels to putting up with incivility have gone down significantly just in the last year. People are speaking up more.
Yeah,
they're speaking up more. They're getting on social media more. Laws are going into place saying we can't prevent. In California last year, or at the beginning of last year, a law was passed. That you can't prevent people from talking about the facts relating to their harassment complaints. And so things are happening where people are going to be speaking up more. And so it's better to just deal with it head on, instead of just putting bandages on it. And a lot of times I hear people say, well, it's too, the money. And I said, believe me, I'm an attorney. I've seen those cases, and I see how expensive those are once the lawsuit is filed. You'd rather spend the money now and set up your culture and really center it around, dignity and respect for every single person at your organization, and really just create a robust plan around, like I said, create a civility plan, and you have to have a separate diversity and inclusion plan, because that's different. And And here's where I think a lot of times companies kind of throw incivility into that bucket of diversity and inclusion, and they're not the same. They're very different. They cover different issues, different goals, different people, different behaviors. So you want to separate the two, because look, I have a huge passion for diversity and inclusion, and I do diversity and inclusion work. I mean, training, I talk on these topics all the time, but my training is not your typical diversity and inclusion training that covers a lot of the issues relating to privilege and white supremacy and anti-racism and all those. Mine's different. And so you really have to look at it through the different lenses, and don't just kind of throw it all into one, because they require different kinds of lenses. And then they also require different accountability from the employees. So you have to look at them differently.
That's interesting. That's so interesting. I shoot, you had said something I know what it was. One of the things that really hit me when you were talking is that you want to do this now. You want to spend this money now. You don't want to wait until there's a lawsuit, because for many reasons. One, the expense. Two, the level of destruction that will have been going on in your business.
Yes.
Right? Like leaders need to appreciate and understand that all of this direct impact on their bottom line.
Oh my God. I mean, if I could just share a statistic.
Sure.
This is just one statistic, and I must say this in like almost every podcast that I do. It's the only one I need to share to make the point. I mean, SHRM came out with a study recently where they said that toxic work cultures, damage morale, productivity, bottom lines, and all of that we already knew. But they reported that just due to employee turnover, just that one piece caused by toxic cultures, cost employers more than $223 billion over 5 years, just from employee turnover.
Wow.
And I mean, you think about what EEOC, the numbers that it collects when these complaints, this discrimination complaints and harassment complaints are filed with the EEOC. Back in 2015, they collected, I think it was like 146 million. In 2018, they collected $505 million for aggrieved parties. So in lawsuits, an average lawsuit, and I'm talking about, I don't know the recent numbers because I haven't litigated in a while, but the last number I looked at was probably about a couple of years ago. An average actually more than that, like 3-4 years ago. So this number is probably a lot more now, but an average lawsuit, an employment lawsuit filed by an employee was costing $125,000. That's not including attorney's fees. So believe me, and nobody wins in those cases. Nobody wins. And because the level of tolerance for harassment and incivility in the workplace has gone down significantly because of just the stuff that's gone on last year, and people are, speaking up more. And just because of that reason alone, I think that, you're not going to survive if you don't address these issues, diversity, inclusion included. You're just not going to survive if you just put bandages on things. And it's not a one training type deal. It's got to be an ongoing. You got to take into account your people too, because honestly, Diane, I feel like this past few months I've been a therapist, not an attorney. I really do, and it's because I feel like in my trainings, people just want to talk. They need a space to have conversations about these issues, and so employers, create a space for your employees to be able to have conversations and talk about the issues that they're dealing with. Create a safe, brave space for these conversations, and then address those issues, right?
Well, and that is key, right? You can't just listen.
Right.
Then you got to take action. I had a client once who called it the no judgment zone. When he would have certain meetings, he would say, okay, this is a no judgment zone. We aren't going to judge each other. You can say anything you want about anything that's going on, in the company, any ideas you have, any grievances, whatever it is, and no one will be judged. And he did it because he really needed people to speak up. and talk about what was going on in order to make sure that he was fixing anything that he wasn't aware of that wasn't really working. And it was really productive for him. It worked really well.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. Will you tell the listeners how they can find you and anything you've got going on you think
Yeah,
would be
sure.
valuable for them to know?
So, I would say if you're on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm a huge advocate of passing along resources and good information. Like, for example, this morning, before we got on the call, Diane, one of the companies that I do some facilitation for got some talk to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing and got some clarification on the sexual harassment laws. And so it's not even reflected on the website yet. I checked this morning, I didn't see it on the website, but I just posted a video about how the requirements for harassment training, it used to be every 2 years you have to get supervisors 120, 2 hours of training, and then non-supervisors 1 hour of training. Well, the CEO of M-Train, Janine Yancey, had a conversation with an assistant deputy at the Department of Fair Employment and Housing and said, this is really making it hard for employers to, if you've got businesses all over and you're doing, you have employees in multiple states, can we break up that 2 hours? And so they just clarified the statutes to say, yes, you can break up the 2 hours. So you can do an hour here, an hour there, still got to cover the same topics, and really provided some insights on how you want to look at it more from, this is a minimum requirement. Look at it from your culture. And so you hear it right from DFEH, and Janine just posted it yesterday, but I just posted it. So I'm really huge on sharing information like that can help you in your business stay on top of some of this stuff. And also I am really, if you couldn't tell by listening to this, I'm really passionate about this topic. So I'm doing a lot of podcasts and posting information. So LinkedIn would be the best place. I'm not on any of the other social medias really. And then the other thing is to take a look at my website. Again, the name of my company is Train Extra, and it's TRAINXTRA. But if you go to my website, trainextra.com, I've got a blog there, and I post things on there. I talk about where I'm speaking. I do webinars and trainings and so forth. So if you want to kind of follow along, and you have my information on my website too, so don't hesitate to email me or get in touch with me if there's anything that I can help you. And if I can't help you, the other piece of it too is I've been doing a lot of sort of talking to other people that are doing this work. And so I'm happy to make introductions and refer people to other subject matter experts if their organization needs it. So don't hesitate to reach out to me.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And thank you so much for the information and for spending the time. I think this is really tremendously valuable. So thanks for doing that. Listeners, thank you. You are who we are doing this for. And I'd like to thank our sponsor. Get your free trial of audible.com by going to audibletrial.com/businessgrowth and do some exploring. It's fun. And you can find podcasts on there, Audible originals, which obviously is content you're not going to find anywhere else. Anyway, it's really awesome. And get your sales strategy headed in the right direction with Succeed Without Selling. It's available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. As always, continue to prosper and be curious. And until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Great careers are forged out of great relationships. Your success, whatever your field, relies and thrives on the support and insights of others. I'm Andy Lapata, an author and speaker on the power of professional relationships. In the Connected Leadership podcast, I have the privilege of interviewing people from around the world to understand the relationships that have made a difference on their journey and how their insights can help you. From Nobel Prize winners to Olympians, from NASA astronauts to peace campaigners, my guests have shared some captivating moments from their lives and careers. Combined with experts from leading universities, cutting-edge authors and giants of business, the Connected Leadership podcast aims to inspire, educate and entertain.